the positive consequences of globalization. It's a bit on the optimistic side. I would like to caution from UNCTAD's side in that when we are looking at the new round of globalization post-crisis, I think we really have to be cautious in the way we look at globalization, that it will not be the same as before. For example, the first thing that we have to think is that the change in the global economic power equation, would that be acceptable to all of us? Would something like Europe, can Europe take something which is of lower level of comfort, lower level of livelihood, well-being than before? It may be subjected to that because of the level of indebtedness, the slow growth, the high unemployment, and the aging community in Europe. And at the same time, emerging economies are coming up and taking the bigger share of globalization. Is that the new equation that the global community can accept? I don't think so. I think at the moment we are still seeing the kind of push and pull that some of those who still used to the old well-being and prosperity will have to hold on to that. Even now we are seeing a lot of conflicts in Europe when people talk about extension of retirement age. When we talked about the lengthening of the work hours in Europe, when we talked about the lower level of social welfare, or that people have to pay more for it. So here is one area in which we're seeing tension arising, although we take all this into account, but the changing circumstances will be there. The second part of it is that the new thinking in the area of the role of the state. It's not a total reversal of the Washington consensus. It's not a total reversal. There has always been some sort of combination of the state role with the role of the market. It has always been. And for successful countries, this is a delicate balance. If they know how to do well, markets will function well, and states will be reluctant to go too far in wading into some of the market areas. So this is becoming more and more necessary for the states to be weighing their role carefully, because now we are saying the states are going into a big way. We just came, Patricia and I and Pascal, we just came from this World Investment Forum in Xiamen. And one of the things we're learning is that in spite of liberalizing efforts in investment area, which would help with the globalization thing, at the same time we are seeing at the national level more effort to regulate investment. But I would say that is positive because they try to link foreign investment to domestic attributes, to the need for domestic policies. There might be some targeting of some industry that governments would like to play a role. There might be need to protect public interest in areas of environment and social affairs. So we are seeing some trends which are different from in the past, because sometimes when we say governments got into this picture to intervene, it might not be positive, but I'm saying that this is a trend. Liberalization is going on, but at the same time, there is more nuance to it, there's more discretion attached to this thing, which is not always bad. And the last part that I would like to raise with the issue on whatever we can help to try to bring in all the elements outside of the first two boxes of Professor Ghemawat is that we may need to be able to understand that participation in the global openness can only be successful and beneficial when it is well prepared. I'm sure that this is reflected in various of Professor Ghemawat's writing. And this is what UNCTAD is all about, is trying to do, and I think is what the WTO has been trying to do in the last few years with the Aid for Trade, Enhanced Integrated Framework. And UNCTAD all along, I would say, since its inception, we've been always saying that trade is good. But whether trade is always good for development is something else. It's not an automatic thing that with more access, more trade, it will be good for development. Trade with center-periphery things, like in the past, some of my predecessors used to mention this, because if you are just remaining on the periphery, you will not be able to gain from trade. You will just always be supplying the centers with all the raw materials, and you gain nothing. Or you graduate from raw materials into assembly thing, and you gain only because of the low wage levels. This is not the right thing. We have to turn all this around, check it up. The centrifugal force, in keeping center there and periphery there is not going to work anymore. So here is what I'm trying to say, that while we are looking at the integrated picture, we have to admit the fact that the global economic equation is going to change. Countries particularly have to determine their own destiny, and they have to be able to determine their own destiny by having their own autonomous input, their own policy space, what we call their own sequencing, their own preparations, and look at some of the successful countries in Asia, and you would see some of these experiences. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patricia. What I got from the remarks of Professor Ghemawat overall is a welcome shift from volume to value. The word value is probably the one he's been mentioning most during his remarks. And I would like to welcome this very much because I believe that it's time that our culture of international trade moves from volumes to value. By the way, following what happened in business some decades ago, where the theory of management did this turn from looking at revenues, looking at turnover, to looking at what, at the end of the day, matters in the P&L, which is how much value you can create as a fundamental purpose of entrepreneurship. Now, it may be that this is starting to happen in international trade. Why is it so? Simply because the pattern of international trade has changed tremendously for the last 30, 40 years. Very, very sketchily, moving from the concept that a country was trading with another country to a concept where bits of a global supply production chain are localized in different countries of this planet. And my own sense is that, and that's what I think Professor Ghemawat's remarks point to, we have now to look at the world of trade as it is, which is both in goods and services, this sort of multi-localization process, and not as it used to be, again, a few decades ago. One of the problems, of course, being that reality, as usual, changes much more rapidly than mentalities. And mentalities, including in the World Trade Organization, are still very much under the influence that it's government that trade, which we all know is not the reality. The reality is that it's government that regulate trade. And one of the reasons why there is so much focus on the administrative part of this table, which Ghemawat showed on where are the obstacles to trade, why are we not more globalized? The reason why there is so much focus on this administrative part of his chart is because it's the only one governments can influence. Hence international trade negotiations. So that's my overall perception of the message we get from this new look at how globalization works. By the way, I would accept that in many cases the perception by public opinion that what globalization is more than what it is in what numbers show, and I'm 100% in agreement with that. On the other side, I would sometimes wish trade negotiators